Hi guys, sorry about that. That was a technical problem. So let's wait maybe for other people to join and we can restart. Maybe write everybody this is a new link and they can join. Cool. So again guys, sorry about this. We had a small technical issue. So let's start from the beginning and I'll do it faster. So why do we do blockchain? We do blockchain because we think blockchain can turn collaboration and openness into competitive advantage for mainstream applications, and at the same time make them better and more attractive for the users. How? The same way open source did it. It allows you to provide guarantees to external users and businesses that otherwise will not come together. It makes applications that are transparent and where users, they are fair, users get a vote, get a say. If you look at open source 20 years ago, there was nothing, nobody would open source, and you think you would crazy to open your source code and give up all your IP, but today 57% of all code is open. The biggest companies in the world, they do open source because it makes them better, it makes them more competitive, and I gave the Google example of how Android became the most aggressive operating system for mobile, taking over 75% of the market from Apple, and how Facebook is deciding to use blockchain to make their, the biggest bank in the world, because they understand that they lost trust of the data, and if they want to create the biggest bank in the world, they need a new system that has a new set of guarantees, a higher level of trust, and they decided to do it with blockchain. So the conclusion is that the biggest companies in the world do open source. So the question that we had in mind was, if the biggest companies in the world do open source, how do we make them to start using blockchain? How do we make them have the same mentality as open source, but with blockchain? And the answer that we got to was that we need to solve, the biggest problem that we saw we have in the industry today. And for us, it was the polarization problem. We think that in our space, everything lives in an extreme. Private versus public, DApps versus enterprise, ideology versus pragmatism. On one hand, you have the East, which is public blockchains, the movement, spirituality, ideology. They understand the value of openness, but the business is not sustainable. There are no DApps, there are no ICOs. The entire kind of space wasn't successful in attractive real businesses, real value, and basically mainstream businesses didn't buy into it. So it was half the way. On the other hand, we have the West, which is private blockchains, capitalism, pragmatism, businesses, but they do private blockchains that are closed, not open, and they don't really bring the true innovation of blockchain. And we think that there is a limit of how much you can run a business that only tries to optimize money. Hey, what's up? And we think it's not sustainable anymore. So we thought that if we could solve, this dichotomy, this polarization, we can really unleash, the mainstream adoption of blockchain. We can open up it to the mainstream. We can bring the biggest companies in the world to use blockchain technology, same as open source did. And this is basically what we try. We set up to do at Orbs. We wanted to build a public blockchain for mainstream applications. We didn't want to reinvent the internet, to recreate the internet, to redesign, decentralized Uber. We thought that we can make existing applications better, but making them more competitive using openness and collaborations via blockchain technology. And this really was aligned with kind of the DNA that we had in the company. Our background, my background is engineering. I worked in high tech for several years. My previous startup was in deep learning, in AI. We sold that company to Alibaba. Tal came from engineering background. He sold his company to Wix. Daniel also, and so on and so on. And we had a lot of experience in open source. Tal basically led the open source development of Wix and led it to become the number 11 company in the world that contributes to open source. You had Facebook and Google and Windows, and then eventually, Microsoft, and then number 11, Wix, which basically Tal did. So the DNA of open source, of trying to bring blockchain into existing mainstream companies, startups, and make them more competitive and not try to revolutionize the world, was really appealing for us at Orbs. And this was what we tried to do. So the first decision we had to make was to decide, we are building an open protocol. Basically, our IP is our developers that will want to develop on the blockchain. And we had to decide what is the target audience of developers we want to target. And one option was to go for Web3 developers. But the problem we had there was that many of the Web3 developers came to the field for opportunity, for maybe financial opportunity, and not necessarily for the right reason. But even if you take away these developers and you stay with the hardcore of real Web3 developers, they are sometimes driven by this ideology and are trying to create applications that would change the world, change the internet, decentralize Uber, not necessarily make existing Ubers more open and more competitive. And also we felt that the Web3 developers market was very small. It's about 1,000 developers. It's completely red oceans. All the blockchains in the world compete in this space, and it's really a market of whoever pays more wins, the developer's heart, take away, some examples. And, with the spirit of open source and our background, we thought there is another market, a market of the general community of open source developers. It's a market of 10 million open source developers. We think it's a blue ocean. We think that it's really a blind spot for many protocols in the market. If we can only convert, the 1% or whatever from this market, we can have 1,000 developers building on Orbs, versus if we had to compete, in the Web3 market, if you want to get 100 developers working on Orbs, this is basically 10% of the entire market. And so we decided that, the general open source community of developers had a similar DNA to Orbs. They didn't want to do blockchains to change the world, to decentralize Uber. They wanted to they didn't come to open source to become rich very fast. They basically wanted to write code that makes applications better, open, and more competitive for the companies they work for, but also better for users that use them. So the first decision was we want to target open source developers. And we have a KPI in 2019 to bring, we hope, 100 developers to build on Orbs. And obviously, we understand that if we achieve this, we can become one of the most powerful blockchains in the world. I mean, if you count the actual number of developers, blockchains like EOS or Ethereum have, it's around that number. If we try to do it in the Web3, it's almost impossible. If we try to get 100 from 10 million open source developers, the general community of open source developers, we think it's fairly possible. And the strategy to do that was to develop in-house use cases that really can show these developers what innovation public blockchains can bring to their day-to-day life. So simple use cases that are not showing them how to decentralize Uber, but really showing them how we can solve simple problems for the open source community using public blockchain, and through that teach them about the innovation, the openness, the collaboration, and the competitive advantage that blockchain brings. One example is, for example, the JavaScript NPM problem, which I won't go into too much detail, but I think we have some ideas how we can develop apps inside Orbs and educate the open source community why they should use blockchain, and why developers in Twitter should bring blockchain to Twitter and Facebook and Google and whatever, all the biggest mainstream companies in the world. The second, so this is the base, the ideology of Orbs. We are next generation open source. We want to bring open source developers. We want to make existing applications more competitive using blockchain technology, exactly the same way open source did it in the past 10 years. The second layer was, what are we actually building? So what we are building is blockchain, a public blockchain for mainstream applications, in one line, exactly like anybody else is doing. But also in the product architecture, we basically took many different routes than other protocols, again, because of the same ideology of making existing applications more competitive. The first example was that we built Orbs as a production layer, as a AWS-like layer on top of Ethereum. We were almost the only protocol in the world that says, listen, Ethereum is amazing, it's great, it's the best liquidity layer out there. Why should we reinvent the wheel and create another native token and just throw away everything that was there before and create basically another blockchain that maybe competes with Ethereum or want to kill Ethereum or whatever. We were the first public blockchain to build a public blockchain on top of Ethereum to bring the utility, the productization problem that Ethereum didn't have. And so we use technology which we wrote in the company, autonomous swaps to basically transfer value from Ethereum to Orbs so that you can have your ERC20 on Ethereum, the best liquidity, the best asset in the world, and then you can run it at speed, low fees, whatever, at Orbs. So this was an example of a decision we made. Our proof of stake model is also, we took some different architecture decisions. We have a proof of stake model, we can go into it, but the biggest innovation in our proof of stake model is that we basically run it on Ethereum. So it's not, do we do this proof of stake, that proof of stake. The biggest innovation we did there, and we are the only blockchain in the world that does it, is that we run the voting on Ethereum itself. And this is critical. It's critical because if the native blockchain runs the voting on the same blockchain, you basically give the cat, to guard the milk. It means that if, for example, EOS block producers, they sign the block, they control, what goes into the block, they basically control everything. So if they want, they can deadlock the entire blockchain. Even if block one wants to do something, there's nothing they can do. But if we run the voting on Ethereum, it basically means that the governance of the network is external to the block producers that actually do the blocks. And it's a huge advantage, and we can go into this. And we have some other very interesting architecture decisions, such as virtualization, and so on and so on. So the way we built Orbs was in a very pragmatic way to provide guarantees for existing mainstream companies to just, have a blockchain stack that we think can work. So it's not about interoperability, and it's not about, a system where there's no forks. It's really about a pragmatic blockchain stack that you can build something simple on it. And the last layer in our strategy was, what is our go-to-market strategy? What are the companies that we want to target? And here again, we had the same problem. Do we target DApps or do we target enterprises? And we thought that the DApps market is pretty dead. Maybe because some reasons I mentioned that many DApps were just opportunistic and they just wanted to whatever, make money. Maybe because they were trying to decentralize Uber and create models that might change the world in the next 5 years or 10 years, but at the moment this business model didn't really pick up. On the other hand, you have a huge enterprise market that is doing blockchain. The biggest companies in the world doing blockchain. It's a huge market, $2 billion today. It's going to be $10 billion in the next few years. But the issues there is that they are doing private blockchain. So we thought we want to tap into the to the real business market, to the enterprise market. But how do we solve the problem that they do private blockchain? And the way we solve it was by understanding that the true innovation of blockchain was not decentralization. The goal was not to decentralize. The goal was to build a system that is more open and provide guarantees to the users. This means that even a system of 5 telecommunication companies, they can collaborate and they can create a system that can give guarantees of transparency, forking, auditability, governance to the 7th telco that wants to join the system. This system is as public, in our opinion, as Ethereum. So it's not about the 15,000 computers. It's about giving guarantees to the 7th company that wants to join, to the 8th telco that wants to join. So when we understood this, we kind of found, the silver lining of doing public blockchains in the corporate existing, enterprise space. So to conclude everything, we want to drive, the next generation of open source. We want to target the general community of open source developers, which is 10 million developers. We build a product that we think should be as pragmatic as possible. We want to bring AWS capabilities to blockchain to work on Ethereum. We don't want to do iteration on Ethereum that are interesting but are still not solving fundamental things such as business model. It doesn't matter if you invented something, but the business model of what you're doing doesn't make sense. It's not predictable. It's not something that real businesses make. So the challenge is not to do iterations over Ethereum. It's to bring AWS capabilities to blockchain. On the product level and on the enterprise level, it was about doing public blockchain for real companies versus reinventing the internet, doing decentralized Uber. So this is basically Orbs in a nutshell, 15 minutes, hopefully with some background and history. And I just wanted to do this because this is the first time I think I have the chance to talk to you guys, which is silly and unfortunate. We should have done it once a month, and we should do it going forward once a month. So after this short and hopefully not that boring speech, I would love to answer any questions. Let me just put Telegram on my computer. Yeah. So any questions about, how do you compare Orbs with other proof-of-stake blockchain? Right. Okay. So I think our greatest, so the question was, how do we compare Orbs to other proof-of-stake blockchains? So before I go to proof-of-stake, I want to give a small comparison to Tezos and Cosmos. Tezos is about creating a blockchain that is unforkable. I think that forking is the most important thing that blockchain can bring to the space. It creates the ability to fork, creates a new set of check and balances that is exactly what makes companies that use blockchains competitive. If for example, people are not happy with Bitcoin, they can just fork it. They can do another one. This makes Bitcoin wants to become as competitive as possible. Bring it to Uber. If one day you will be able to fork Uber and make another Uber that is cheaper, Uber will have to remain competitive so that forking will not happen. So forking is a beautiful thing. We think it's one of the biggest innovations that space can bring. Cosmos are doing interoperability. What I think about interoperability, I think it's first of all, to connect blockchains, before we even have one successful blockchain, before we can even explain why do we need the public blockchain is interesting. But let's say that we manage to build several interesting public blockchains and we need to connect between them. Then I think that connectivity is really 1% of the problem. If you consider applications today, Facebook, they have billions of transactions, and then you have Google, billions of transactions. But so 99% of what's going on is the need to actually run these applications, to provide an infrastructure where the better Facebooks and the better Googles can run on. How much Google and Facebooks need to communicate between them it's a much smaller amount. It's maybe 1%. The biggest challenge is running this 99%. A lesser challenge, I think, is the operability between these blockchains. And we at Orbs, we are focusing on running the applications. We're focusing less on the interoperability, even though we have interoperability because we need it to Ethereum. It's great. So that's just about that. So proof of stake. It's a long discussion. We need to talk about why do we do proof of stake? What goals are we trying to achieve? What we want the network to achieve? And we have a model. And we have delegators, and we have guardians, and we have validators, and we made some decisions, and we did our iteration on proof of stake. Is it genius? I don't think so. Is it going to work? Maybe. The biggest change we did to proof of stake is to understand that it's going to take iterations to bootstrap a proof of stake blockchain that will actually work. Take EOS, for example, they invented depots. They were the first blockchain to do it. They came out with something, and it was, it was amazing. No one did it before. But after 2 months, it got kind of consolidated into the hands of big, players that basically control the entire network now. And the ability to change is very limited. You cannot hit the right system in one go. It doesn't work. It's like trying to land a spaceship on the moon with just the first trajectory. You must be able to iterate. By understanding this, we decided to run the voting mechanism, our voting mechanism on Ethereum. And this gives us several advantages. It basically gives us the advantage to iterate, and the validators of the network cannot hijack the network and say, we don't want to iterate anymore. How do we do this? Orbs is an ERC20. So the token is actually on Ethereum. It's not on the native network. This means that if the block producers, they decide that they don't want to change anything, they don't actually control the token, the asset, as opposed to, for example, EOS. If in EOS the block producer says, we don't want to iterate, we don't want to change anything for whatever reasons, they control everything. They control the block, they control the coins. In Orbs, by having Orbs as an ERC20, they don't control the assets. They don't control the assets of the users, of the partners. So Orbs is an ERC20. The rewards is an ERC20, meaning that we control 55% of the reward. If we think that the model doesn't work because we released something and then it got hijacked by Chinese whales, we say, okay, guys, we just, we run the voting on a virtual chain, we just fork it to another virtual chain. The coins is ERC20, they are not controlled by the block producers, and the reward is an ERC20, is not controlled by the block producers. So we just shift the rewards to this new virtual chain that does the new proof of stake, the next iteration of proof of stake. Now, block producers, they can decide if they want to move or not. On one end, they have the existing proof of stake model that is not going to give rewards anymore, and on the other hand, you have the iteration of the proof of stake model that is now giving the new rewards. So basically, we can iterate on the proof of stake model without being hijacked, let's say, by the validators and block producers. So we think that this is the right way to bootstrap a blockchain. Eventually, in 3 years, we want Orbs to be completely decentralized and autonomous and secure and with really high value. But to say that I know how to do proof of stake today, to achieve this, the answer is no. But we are, I think, we were very creative in our decision making to enable us to do 100 of iterations and get it right at the end. And we have, the rewards, we have the money, we have 7 years to try. So hopefully we will get it. And others will have, I think, more difficulties.
Some great questions here.
Yeah. Can you talk about nodes staking and how many tokens will be required to run a node? Right. So in the first iterations of our proof of stake model, so there are 3 main parts in our initial proof of stake model. The first one is delegators. Delegators, they basically can delegate their voting powers to entities we call guardians. Guardians, they represent, they are like party leaders, community leaders. They represent the voting power of the delegates. And the guardians, they vote to validators. Validators are the technical guys that basically are in charge of the security of the network, signing the blocks, yada, yada. The reason we separated between guardians and validators was we wanted to separate between the technical job of running the blockchain and the political, the financial, the business role of supporting an ecosystem. So delegates, they vote for guardians. Guardians consolidate votes. They vote for validators. Whoever validators is left, they do the consensus security and so on. At the moment, there is no minimum requirement to be hidden. You can have 0 orbs to become a validator, 0 orbs to become guardian, and 0 orbs to delegate. You need some orbs. In the future, we might change this. In the future, we think that if we introduce mechanisms of slashing and so on, this can greatly improve the security of the network by not imposing too much hardship on the validators or the guardians. So at the moment, there is no minimal requirement. Maybe in the future there will be a requirement. I don't think it will be that high because eventually it should be a permissionless blockchain. Everybody should join, but we might need some minimum in order to enable features such as slashing, which will make the security much more competitive for a much lower stake. Why is this important? Because one of the biggest challenges of proof of stake is the trade-off between security and cost. When people stake, they expect a return in order, 5% yearly return, thanks. In order to finance this return, you need to pay them an interest, 5%, 6% a year. This makes blockchains expensive. You can see this happening in years. So in order to have a better trade-off between security and the cost of running a node, slashing is an interesting concept. So I hope I answered. How will you address enterprise companies who want to use your technology but refuse to touch any tokens due to right? Yeah, that's a good question. So for example, we have a big project in Korea, a company called Yes24. It's a medium-sized conglomerate in Korea, around $500 million yearly revenue. It's the biggest kind of bookstore, like online bookstore in Korea, what Amazon was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So we signed a contract with them. It was signed and announced in the last event in Korea. Interesting. They want to use Orbs to create a public blockchain for e-commerce. But one of the questions that we ask ourselves, how does the business model how is their business model going to be why would it require a token, the Orbs token? And we see it in other places. We are working to become part of the blockchain standard for the telco industry in the world. We are working on payment systems with some of the biggest, trying to work with the biggest payment systems in Korea. And we see this problem again and again and again. Some use cases of public blockchains, they are public. They provide the guarantees that I mentioned before, but they don't necessarily need a token. We don't have the best answers for this. Several options could be, these companies, they pay us licenses and so on, and we use these revenues and income and we buy back tokens. This is how we can shift value that is generated in dollars into value that is generated in tokens. But the good news is that all these companies, the reasons they go for Orbs and not Hyperledger is because they understand that they need, eventually they would need to become public. And become public means they need to be open, but they also need economics. They need a token, they need economics inside the system. Why? Imagine that you start with 6 telcos that are running a blockchain, just the 6 biggest telcos. They don't care about costs, there's no token. But the moment they go into, let's say, 500 companies, and in this telco organization there are 3,000 telco companies, then you need a financial model. I mean, someone needs to pay. Why? Who should pay for the system? The small one, the big one? And once they realize that, they need economy and they need a token, and in this case, it will be the Orbs token. So on the short term, where there is not yet a need for a token, then answers such as revenues, buyback, and in the medium long term, everybody understands that public systems, they need economy, so therefore the token will be used. But it's a great question, and I don't have the perfect answer for this.
Is it YouTube question also?
What is the Orbs company business? Where do you get your profits? How do you survive past 7 years? So first of all, we have sufficient funds for 7 to 10 years, depending on how much we want to be aggressive on our burn rate. With the current burn rate, we have, for example, 7 years, and it's pretty aggressive. We have offices in San Francisco and in Seoul and in Singapore and in Israel. We do PR, we do, I think, aggressive marketing in Korea at the moment, but we are going to expand it. I think in Korea we became relatively good with our marketing. The event we did last week, according to Koreans, was the biggest event, the biggest participation of projects ever, even bigger than yours. Orbs is positioned in Korea as one of the top 4 brands, competing with Kakao and Upbeat and the others. So even with the existing burn rate, which is relatively aggressive, we have 7 years to go, which is good. We are here to fight, and I think as the space matures, I think that it will be super interesting to see, what strategies and ideology is going to win. Is it, and again, I'm not against anything, but is it the no forking one? Is it the interoperability one? Or is it the next generation open source one? But I think the more the space evolves, it's more about bringing actual business to the space and less about, blah, blah, blah. And I think we have a good set of competitive advantages where it comes to trying to build real stuff for real companies for real value. But there is no business model for Orbs. We are building a public protocol. When we when we launch the platform becomes public. It's not ours anymore. It's going to be run by validators and guardians. It's going to belong to whoever wants to run it. It's going to belong to whoever wants to hold Orbs tokens and stake them. It's not ours anymore. Initially, we hold a majority of the tokens, so we have a lot of power. But in the process of several years, we are going to disintegrate this power and become equal to anybody else. So, there would be several players that will hold very similar amounts of Orbs, and they will have equal kind of, governance and ownership on this thing. So it's not ours, it's actually ours. And by ours, I mean, the community. It's yours, it's ours. In the beginning, it's more ours than yours, but in 1 to 3 years, it's more yours than ours. So the business model is to, if you want to use Orbs, you need to use the Orbs tokens. Our business model is subscription fee and not gas. We think it's more suited for mainstream applications. But in that sense, it's similar to Ethereum. You want to use Orbs, you need to buy it, you need to have monthly subscription, and if the platform is successful, if we become the AWS of blockchain, then there would be demand for the token, price appreciation, and so on. Until we get there, if we deal with enterprises that they want to pay but they don't want the token and so on, then maybe we need to convey this value back into the token using buybacks and so on. AWS, what? AWS is super huge. What exactly AWS services are you targeting? Right. So this is a good question. And so I think that one interesting aspect in the space is that I see some of the other public blockchains as iterations on Ethereum. Interesting iterations. It's faster. It's faster. Amazing. But I think that the challenge is not to do iterations on Ethereum, is to actually bring, I call it AWS capabilities to blockchain. We're not AWS, far from it. We are 60 people. AWS is 1 million people. Great business. We are nothing compared to that. By AWS, I mean AWS by inspiration. Our product inspiration is Ethereum for their ideology, for the movement that they created, for the great innovation that they brought to the space. But it needs a lot of work to actually work. And on the other hand, it's AWS. It's the basically world standard for blockchain, for infrastructure in the world. It works. It's the best infrastructure in the world. People, the best service, the best quality of service, the best business model, the best whatever. If we want to be a world grade, a mainstream infrastructure for blockchain applications, we need to be as good as AWS, and we need to keep providing the core guarantees and innovation of blockchain technologies by working together and on top blockchains like Ethereum. So when I say AWS, I say by inspiration. But I can give a small example. Fees structure is an interesting example. It's not, we think that businesses pay in subscriptions. And more than that, they need a fixed and guarantee a cost. You run a business on infrastructure, you need to know how much you're going to pay each month. And it's not gonna, it cannot be, dependent on fluctuations of price and whatever. We think it doesn't make sense. So if you look at other public blockchains, they solve amazing problems such as speed, and speed. But they don't necessarily address the most fundamental problems in the world. Fixed and guarantee, cost for applications. For example, another interesting example is quality of service. Let's say if I run on AWS, I get 100 transactions per second guaranteed. That's it. If I run on blockchains, what do I get? I get one day I get this, the other that I get that. There's no guarantee. So guaranteeing quality of service, guaranteeing a monthly fixed subscription fee is solutions that we need to bring to the space inspired by real-world infrastructures like AWS. If we just iterate on Ethereum and make it better and better and faster and faster and faster, we don't necessarily, I think, move in the right directions. So that's what I meant by AWS. We are not AWS, but we look at them for inspiration. When do you expect staking to start? After mainnet launch, what does the next? Cool. Staking will start, I think, either exactly on mainnet launch. So staking will start when mainnet is launched. The first, I think, voting cycle is 1 week after mainnet, because we wanted to give some time for things to kind of happen, and then it's going to be every 3 days. But basically, staking will start at the moment the mainnet is launched. People get their tokens. They can either stake it and stay with us for the long term and win, or they can send it to exchanges. So that's from day one, and voting will start after a week, and then we have voting every 3 days, done by guardians and so on. The next 60 days. Okay. So we are launching the platform. So I can take, we have 3 kind of major responsibilities at Orbs. Tal, who is our technical co-founder, he's in charge on the developer community. His goal is to bring maybe 100 open source developers to use Orbs in 2019. That's what he does. Of course, that he codes. He wrote the entire blockchain. He wrote the entire code. We wrote the entire blockchain consensus, everything you want from scratch. So he does that, but he also needs to bring developers. I'm in charge mainly on our proof of stake universe. So my goal is to bring strategic partners that would want to become part of the Orbs universe. So my next 2 months is actually roadshows. I'm going to roadshow in May around consensus. I want to do a roadshow in USA, and in June I want to do a roadshow around a big event in Asia, for Southeast Asia. So my target for 2019 is to bring 10 to 15 strategic guardians, stakeholders for Orbs. What does it mean, strategic? It means partners that have a lot of stake, whether because they have it already or because they will buy from the secondary market. It means these are partners that can bring strategic value for the ecosystem, whether geographically, so maybe we want a strong guardian in Korea, even though we have in Japan, Europe, whatever. Maybe there are a strong guardian for a specific vertical, IBM, telco, or they can be a strategic guardian that can send the right signals to the market, to potential customers, whether it's a big VC or a big applications, Twitter. So my goal in the next 2 months and in the year is to bring 10 to 15 strategic partners that will buy and have Orbs and will want to become part of this blockchain going forward. And then Daniel's goal is basically to bring business. We cannot just build technology. We cannot just do proof of stake. Our DNA, we cannot just build something that no one uses. We will go crazy. It's not just about words. So one of the core values we have in Orbs is we are striving for finding use cases, to finding real business super hard. I'm telling you, put 10 people in a line, ask them why public blockchain, you get 20 different answers. It's like they laugh on Israelis. They say that you put 4 Israelis in a room, you hear 7 different opinions. So I think the same is true for public blockchains. So Daniel goes after business. The goal here is quality over quantity. We don't want 2,000 apps that maybe do nothing. We want to be able to bring a use case that I can explain to you why does this use case need to run on a public blockchain, and you will understand and agree and like it, and you will not argue, but you could do the same with SQL, or you will not say this use case doesn't make sense. Quality over quantity. We feel that we need, so one of the mistakes maybe we did in 2018 was that we relied on applications to give us requirements, how to develop infrastructure for them, which was great, but we relied on them to come up with the use case. So we worked with applications, DApps mainly, that gave us good requirements. How should we build an infrastructure for mainstream applications? But it turned out that their use case wasn't sustainable. I mean, most of them basically didn't survive. The use case was not good. So in 2019, we kind of understood that we cannot rely on the DApps to only give us requirements. We need also ourselves to go on a search for real use cases. Quality over quantity, get real use cases in the enterprise space. So this is Daniel, and each one of us, we have a short-term goal. I mentioned mine, roadshows May and June, and Daniel and Tal, I have no idea what they're doing, but I know the general targets for 2019, 100 developers, 5 enterprises and so on. Cool.
Maybe some YouTube questions?
YouTube questions? Cool. Well, where can I see it? Okay, so I'm just getting questions from YouTube.
These 2 patrons.
Okay, so a question here, with the work we did in the past, where do you see yourself compared to the competitors in different markets? So I think that the core DNA we bring to Orbs is entrepreneurship. We basically, build companies. I sold the company to Alibaba, Tal sold the company to Wix, Daniel did Payki, which is a very successful fintech company in Israel. They raised $50 million from MasterCard and so on, and he's the president over there. So in entrepreneurship, we are pragmatic. We want to build things that work. We are not necessarily the right people to decentralize Uber. We want to make existing mainstream companies more competitive using openness and collaboration that blockchain brings. We are not necessarily want to decentralize everything and destroy. So the first kind of DNA is pragmatism, entrepreneurship. just build things that are better, not necessarily reinvent the internet. I'm not against, by the way, reinventing the internet. I hope it will happen. I'm totally for destroying everything and making a new thing, new Uber. I wish, why not? The second, I think, DNA is open source. The entire team we built was basically around Tal. Tal was one of the biggest open source developers for React Native. Facebook wanted to hire him to manage the React Native for the whole Facebook. He brought Wix to become the 11th biggest open source contributor in the world, together with the biggest companies in the world. And the team we built around Tal is a team of basically just regular, common open source developers. Their ideology is not to do blockchain for money. It's not to do blockchains to decentralized Uber. It's to build things that work and collaborate and just improve day-to-day products, verticals, our lifestyle. And I think that this DNA is taking us in just a different path. We don't want to target Web3 developers. We want to target general open source community developers. We build together with Ethereum. We don't necessarily want to kill it. We target enterprise, and we understand how to do public blockchain in that space versus maybe the apps. So I think that the DNA is different. We don't want to live in the polarization of the space. On one hand, public blockchains, ideology, no money, no business. On the other hand, private blockchains, good companies, but not necessarily innovation. We want to solve this problem, to solve this dichotomy, and through that, unleash mainstream. And this is where we sit and where we see the differentiation.
Last question.
Last questions? Okay, so one more question, and if you enjoy it, we can do it more. I mean, I love talking. Every time I have a chance to talk, I talk to 2 hours. It's a problem. You can ask my wife. But onboarding enterprise is hard. How do you plan to deal with that, including migration the system into blockchain? It's difficult to get enterprises, and the market is competitive. Great question. Very good question. We are not a company that does enterprise sales. We are a company that develops an open protocol. We want to empower, educate developers that sits inside companies such as Twitter and Facebook and so on to use Orbs public blockchains to make their products better. We are not trying to do sales. We don't have a sales team that supporting the sales cycles of 1-2 years. We are teaching developers inside enterprise how blockchains can make their products and enterprise more competitive through openness and collaboration. We are targeting, so the base layer is the developers. If we can reach developers in the biggest companies in the world, and they understand our language, because it's not about, we don't preach interoperability, we preach make your product just more competitive, make it open, make it whatever. So hopefully we are able to reach them and convince them that Orbs is the product they should develop on, and even understand why public blockchain. On top of this, we think that we are not ready to directly onboard enterprises. Instead, we want to build layers of solutions on top of Orbs. Solution for identity, solution for, payment, solution for this. So we are actually targeting solution builders, mainly SIs, system integrators. So we talked to some of the biggest system integrators in the world, and they are facing the actual companies. So we have a big one that is doing a stable coin with a big bank. We have a big one that is doing a telco project with a big telco. We target the system integrators, and they build solutions on top Orbs, and they have the ability, 100,000 people's SIs, they have the ability to build the actual applications, to support it, to do the maintenance, and so on. So the the approach is basically bottom-up. Developers, system integrators, solution builders, and then the enterprise. We are very active in talking to enterprises directly because we want to understand them. We want to understand what they need. So we do it to learn, but we don't sell them technology. One last thing, Bitfarm announcement from the event. I could not find any confirmation on Bitfarm resources. I think there's many confirmations. So just check Bitfarm Twitter or whatever. Everything is in Korean, but I think that they talk about Orbs quite a lot. I just see in the groups, in the main group, maybe not in this group. That's it. So thank you very much. I hope it was good. I would love to do it again. So if there's any any requirement from your side, we would love to do it. I can also invite Tal to talk, and Daniel, or whoever you want. Each one of us has kind of a different angle. Thank you for the support so far. I think you have been with us for a very long way. I think for over a year, and this group remained very close and supportive, asking questions, giving advices also in private messages. So it's also a good opportunity to say really thank you for everything. And maybe the last thing is that now we need you more than ever. Now the mainnet is launching in a day or two. Now it becomes a public project, not the Orbs project or not my project. It's your project. The more you participate, the more you stake, the more you delegate, the more you support us building the Orbs universe, I think you can help us make a better ecosystem and blockchain. So now we need you the most, and I hope that we can get as much support as possible. Great. So thanks everyone, and appreciate all the help so far, and hope to have the opportunity to talk with you again soon.